The Knee Gurus, the latest research and advice from industry experts for best practice management on knee injuries and pain. Here's your host, Bevan Collis.
Welcome back to the Knee Gurus. I'm your host, Bevan Collis, and today I'm very excited to welcome Mick Hughes to the podcast. Mick is a sport and exercise physiotherapist and founder of Learn.Physio, which is an online learning module for physiotherapists and other health care professionals. Mick, along with Randall Cooper, is also co-author of the Melbourne ACL Rehabilitation Guide, which was groundbreaking at that time, particularly when it was published, for being the first to give some concrete function-based progression guidelines for post-operative ACL, in opposed to the time-based progressions which were standard at the time. He's also been somewhat of a champion for the quadriceps and open chain exercises at a time when many people, particularly surgeons, were against open chain exercises, and many were focused more on range of motion post-op than quadriceps firing and activation. And he continues to be heavily involved in ACL management to this day. He's probably one of the highest profile ACL physiotherapists in Australia, and he's still practicing, seeing patients from his clinic in Townsville today. And so we're very happy and excited to have Mick on the podcast today. Welcome to the Knee Gurus, Mick.
Oh, Bevan, what a way to pump up my tyres. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Thanks for asking me to come along. It's nice to have a chat. It was actually nice to meet you only a few months ago in Singapore too. So nice to put a face to your name. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Terrific. So can you tell us a little bit how you got involved in having a special interest in ACL management?
Yeah, I kind of fell into it largely because I thought that I sucked at it, and probably, to be fair, I did in my early career. I liked the thought of rehabbing ACLs, and I saw a few ACLs early on in my career, and was managing maybe 2 or 3 a week. We had like a good physio clinic here that had some good referral networks from orthopedic surgeons here in Townsville. And then when I moved to Newcastle, we had a similar kind of setup where we're getting a high volume of post-operative lower limb patients, including a lot of ACLs. So I was seeing like a solid amount of ACLs early, and it bubbled along the way, and I thought I was doing a pretty good job. And then effectively, when I landed the job with Collingwood Magpies netball team as their head physio in 2016, it really almost forced my hand to get better. I'd landed myself in a job where ACL injuries are going to be probably one of our more, or knee injuries as a whole are going to be a more common injury we'll see, along with ankles. But the list that I was working with, we had an ACL patient and an ACL athlete on our list who turned up at 6 months post-op and was about to start, the season with us. So, and then we had a post-operative knee patient who just had a scope and some microfracturing done. So the knee rehab world, I really needed to get my head around really, really quickly. Because the way with netball is too, in professional circles, we've got a list of 10 athletes. And we've got very, very little margin for error. So if any one of those 10 athletes goes down, so we've got 7 on the court, 3 on the bench, and then we've got a few sort of backup players who play in the lower competition. So if any one of your top 10 go down, you're then kind of losing one of your key players and key personnel. So you can't afford to get things wrong. So the AFL and rugby league world, soccer land, it hurts when you get things wrong, but there's a little bit more wriggle room and a bit more margin for error. For netball, I felt like we had almost none. So I dived straight into ACL rehab literature and took a deep dive there for a good 12 to 18 months, and was lucky enough to work firsthand at the coalface with that athlete, or those 2 particular athletes, and then also learn a hell of a lot from the AFL guys who were working with the Collingwood Magpies. We had a really nice collegiate environment where I was learning off them, taking heaps of things on board, and that kind of really stirred me up and got a fire burning for ACL rehab, and then from then it kind of just one thing led to another. At the back of that ACL, at the end of that season, I was asked to present at La Trobe University Symposium on a particular case of that netball athlete. So I presented that to an audience, and once again, when you're presenting, you're then sort of finding out more information, and
Yep.
it just that's where it all started, Bevan, and it kind of just rolled on. 6-7 years later, I'm still learning, and the way ACL research and publications are being spat out every month, I'll be still learning for the next 20 years, I reckon, maybe 30 years. Where it's
Yes.
a really, I guess, of all the injuries that are out there and all the parts of the body, it's a nice evolving part of the body that we never know enough about, and I don't think we'll ever find out all the answers, especially not over the next 20 years. We'll still be learning in 20 years' time.
Yeah, I can imagine. And when you published the Melbourne ACL Rehabilitation Guide, how was the reaction to it? Did you get any pushback, or did people sort of feel that, the penny's finally dropped? We can't just say that because someone's 12 weeks post-op that they're okay to run, and we need to think a bit more about these progressions. Or how was it sort of received as the author?
It was pretty good. To be fair, it was really well received, and I certainly need to credit my co-author Randall Cooper. He came up with the first set of guidelines back in sort of late 2000s. I think he published the first set of guidelines in 2008. Then it kind of sat out there online for everyone to sort of see. Obviously, before the popularity of Instagram and social medias and YouTube, but it kind of sat there online, doing its thing for a while with not too much attention given to it. But then 2016, 2017, all this wonderful ACL research and discharge criteria came out, and the research from Karitsis and Grindam 2016 that sort of showed criteria is a much better way to look at clearing someone to return back to sport rather than passing time frames alone. So it was an interesting time frame, 2016, because that's where the research, I think, changed quite a lot dramatically towards a criteria-driven program with ACL and discharge criteria being really key. So I then teamed up with Randall. We worked together on bringing his original Melbourne ACL Rehab Guide to 2.0 with a reboot and an update. To answer your question about pushback, there wasn't much at all. To be honest, the only pushback we got originally was, why are you charging $5 for the guide? that was it.
I think I paid 100.
Yeah,
from memory.
You paid too much, mate. The guide was $5 US. That we covered a few costs for production costs. We made a little bit of a profit there, but ultimately it led us to growing Learn.physio to what it is too. We use that money to build new educational contents and all that kind of stuff. And ultimately our next version of Melbourne ACL Rehab Guide 3.0, which will come out next year, will be free. We'll have a free website. It'll be all the bells and whistles, and it'll be really fancy, and it'll be absolutely free for everyone to enjoy. That's the only pushback we got. We didn't get much from surgeons. The surgeons embraced it. We had some surgeons who were basically handing it out to their patients, saying, "Look, this is what you need to be doing." We loved it. We were really blown away and chuffed by how it was well received, not only in Australia but worldwide. We had clinicians reach out to us from America, from Europe, from UK, parts of Asia, saying, I use my guide and I still use your guide on a daily basis. Even 5-6 years later, people are still using it, which is wonderful. It's really lovely to see. And we can't wait to release the next version next year when the time's right.
Yep, terrific. It's definitely been a boon to ACL management. One of the questions I ask in any interview I'm doing with my sort of prospective physios is what changes has there been to the ACL landscape in the last few years, and what do you think about the ACL Rehabilitation Guide? And if they've got no idea what the Melbourne ACL Rehabilitation Guide is, then they're probably unlikely to get a job. So little tip out there for prospective employees. So when we're digging into these guidelines for progression, if we go to the sort of early stage post-operative tests, when do you think we should start testing, and what are we testing in the early stage, sort of pre 8 weeks, 10 weeks, say, post-op, and what markers are we hoping to hit?
Yeah, no, awesome question. I've certainly changed my practice in the last probably 6 months here as well. Like I'd probably usually hold off to test quads, test hamstrings at about the 3 month mark. That was kind of my standard behavior isometrically, in a handheld, using handheld dynamometry more often than not. Um, Isometrically at 90 degrees to test quads, and hamstrings. That would be my kind of go-tos at 12 weeks. But I've found over the last few months that I actually start testing at about 6 weeks post-op now, because it can kind of give the patient a little bit of an idea. Because often at 6 weeks, some people are going really well. They feel like they're killing it. And it can be an answer to what they're feeling, and even clinically to you, it can give you an answer as to how they truly are going. They may be completely overconfident in their ability, or they might be absolutely exactly where they're saying. Because the reality is, if they're doing really well at 6 weeks post-op in terms of their quadricep activity and their ability to recruit their quads, and they've maintained their muscle mass really nicely, and they haven't let the arthrogenic muscle inhibition really kick in, and their patellofemoral joint pains being pretty well, kept at bay, and their quads are looking really nice and healthy. Arguably, they'll continue on a nice trajectory to about that 3 month mark, where they'll probably sit at a level somewhere between 70% limb symmetry index, give or take 5 or 10% above or below. And we know that's an important marker, because we know if we're sort of at that level, people are getting really close to running. And that's their first major mental milestone and physical milestone. Like, you ask most athletes that have had an ACL reconstruction, most of them, the first question is, when can I run again? When can I sort of get on the field and kick a footy again? And we need to run to do those things. So ballpark figures and what surgeons will tell them is that you'll be running at 3 months. And it's like, once again, as we said before, time alone is a really poor indicator. But if we can give them a rough time frame here to say, are you on track to hit this 70% limb symmetry mark, which is a rough guide, but a reasonable goal at 3 months, at least we can sort of get an idea, are they close at 6 months? Are they close at 6 weeks? Because if they do an isometric test at 6 weeks, they got pain, they got atrophy, they're really struggling, they got poor range of movement. In their head, they're thinking, I'm going to be running in 6 weeks' time at the 3 month mark, yet they can only punch out a strength test that sits them at 20% limb symmetry. They've got absolutely no chance of running at 3 months. So then you can adjust the goalposts for them. You can say, look, the way you're tracking at the moment, we may need to change your expectations here. So I see the value in a 6 week test, because it can sort of tell you, are they tracking in the right direction, or are their expectations a little bit off? And it allows you to sort of redirect their goals a little bit more. So yeah, they're my kind of main two goals, and more so quads than hamstrings. Hamstrings don't have the same effect on the patellofemoral joint and the knee in terms of shock absorbing and work done at the knee when you need to run. Hamstrings, yeah, we need the hamstrings for high speed running, which are super important for later on. But at 3 months, when they go for their first run, it won't be a sprint by any means. So I certainly weight the quadricep test more than the hamstring test. And I certainly place more emphasis on that one.
And have you got a number that you're hoping people can hit at that 6 week
test, as far as the percentage of?
At 6 weeks, I think if they're at about the 50, if they've got 50% limb symmetry, give or take 5%, where we'll get there in the next 6 weeks more often than not.
Great.
But if they're really struggling to hit 50% limb symmetry by 6 weeks, we'll probably, we might be a little bit off there. That's just my sort of clinical experience here. It depends on your setup, depends on your patient, and there'll be different things. But that's more of an experience kind of number based thing. There's nothing hard or firm in the literature there that says if you hit 50% by 6 weeks, you'll follow this trajectory. That's what the trends that I've been seeing in the clinic.
Yep, no, it's a clinical gem there. 50% at 6 weeks, quads symmetry. And tell us a little bit about range of motion and how much value you put on that post-op, because it seems like the patients and a lot of surgeons and a lot of physios, to be fair, really focus on flexion range of motion as the key indicator as to how someone's going. And I had a knee surgery in Japan, and I knew that every time I was going to the physio downstairs, they kept you in hospital for 2 years there, that the only thing the physio was looking at is how much flexion I had in my knee, and the goniometer was out, and I'm measuring it degree by degree, day by day. Where do you see knee flexion in particular as importance as a guideline for post-operative, and also if you could touch on extension as well?
Yeah, flexion, not so much, to be honest. For me, flexion's important to ride a bike, and we know riding a stationary bike can be super helpful for a lot of different things early on in the rehab process. So you need about 105 degrees on an exercise bike to actually sit up fairly high on the seat, to actually strike down on the pedal and then come up pretty comfortably without having to drop your foot and hit your hip and do these real funky things. So you need at least 105 degrees. That's the main, from a flexion point of view, that's the thing that I probably matter the most. Beyond 105 degrees, I'm not too particular about, we've got to be 120 by week 6, we've got to be 130 by week 20 or whatever. I don't think we need to be so particular with those specific angles beyond that. Riding a bike can be helpful for range of movement. It's bending and straightening your knee nicely. We're getting lots of low impact exercise to help with fluid removal, pain. But mentally, for someone to get on a bike and actually start some cardiovascular work is mentally and physically powerful for them. So that's a big thing for me. I definitely put more emphasis on extension. I really try to chase extension early, but not to the point that I'm forcing or chasing hyperextension either. Hyperextension will come, like flexion, it will come. I don't believe in pushing and really being greatly physical with a particular patient just to get a 5-degree shift in flexion in a session. I find that the knee ends up flaring up and gets crankier, and you piss off the knee and it gets swollen and sore, and they can't train the next couple of days because you've aggravated it. Consistency is really key there, and I firmly believe people will find their own way into a range of movement if we just let them get there on their own accord. I firmly believe that, you be too hands-on and too vigorous early, we just end up going one step forward, 2 steps back constantly, and it's not helpful to anyone. But extension, definitely. I want a straight knee because we know the quads. You'd need a 0 degrees extension to get really healthy quad recruitment, so that when they're walking in terminal knee stands, they actually can contract their quad and straighten their knee out. They can do a straight leg raise, they can do knee extension work and get that quad firing really, really nicely. That's what I pay really close particular attention to.
And what about for the patients who are lagging behind full extension, say they're 8 weeks post-op and they've still got 10 degrees or more extension lag? Have you got any tips for physios or patients on exercises or way they can push that and get it a little bit faster?
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I find it's often the absence of open chain knee extension work can do it. Can help that along quite nicely, because often,
interesting.
Yeah, often just the simple act of getting the quads a bit more excited can actually get them that last little bit of active range. If it's a lack, so they have got a passive restriction there, then it's hard to do that. But if they can passively be moved into knee extension, yet they just don't have that strength to move at that last 10 degrees, and that's something we can change quite nicely. Sitting open chain exercises against gravity can be helpful. You might need to passively take them out there into a full knee lock. You get them to even just try to hold their legs straight on the edge of the bed so that's hovering there in knee extension, and then you get them to slowly eccentrically lower it. That's a really simple strategy there. They can do that with their other leg, or they can get a partner, or you can do that in the physio clinic where you're passively taking there, hold it there locked, and down you come. That's a really simple one. And good old-fashioned terminal knee extensions in standing, that can work. But once again, you've got to be careful that they're not extending at the hip and they're cheating through the hip to try and lock the knee out. You really need that quad really locking down. and shutting that knee tight. But I find that first option there, that passive knee extension, and then getting them to hold it there statically, and then the focused eccentric lowering, that goes a long way in helping that little extension lag.
And what about in Japan? I know they often recommend people to get a 5 kilo bag of rice and put that on top of their knee when it's out in full extension and try to relax and let that push into. Do you think that sort of passive push into knee extension like that's beneficial?
Yeah, in a way, I think that might be helpful. I think it just might get a bit irritable with the hamstring harvest. So your hamstring autografts just might get a bit cranky. Like that harvest tissue at the back of the leg, there can definitely be a bit more guarded activity there and a bit of jumping there. If we're forcing it into a stretch, even into a bit of hyperextension, you might get a bit of that tightness and that soreness just largely through that mechanism. So I think we've probably just got to be careful with the loading. But if they can sit there comfortably, with their leg elevated with nothing underneath them, and drape a 2 kilo, 5 kilo bag of rice, as long as it's not sore and painful and uncomfortable, there's probably some value in doing that. Like anything, we just got to be. I think we just got to be really careful in chasing hyperextension. If we're chasing extension, great. It's just chasing that hyperextension. We just got to be really careful.
Yeah. I think that's a couple of good tips there. Be careful with the hamstrings, and more for people with noticeable extension lag than somebody that's got full extension and pushing in a hyper. And so we touched earlier a little bit in the intro, and you sort of mentioned it earlier. You've been somewhat of a champion for open chain exercises, and I think we can attribute the quote "quads are king" to you. I'm not sure if that was yours or not, but that's one that we use in our clinic a little bit. People say, "Oh, Bevan likes to say quads are king." So some of my staff to say, "Oh, quads are king." It's a trademark Bevan Collis. I said, "No, I can't take the credit for that. I'm pretty sure it was Mick Hughes." But and I think with this database measurement, it's been really cool to put a number on the quads, and probably glutes have become super trendy over the last 5-10 years, and quads get a little bit forgotten about, or have been a little bit forgotten about. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of closed chain, the closed chain versus open chain debate, and how you got around to I guess working out and putting emphasis on quadriceps firing, quadricep strength as one of the key markers post-op or post-injury?
Yeah, I've certainly listened to a lot of people who are smarter than me in this space, and I've sort of learned a hell of a lot. Like Lynn Snyder-Mackler from the US has been a huge advocate for open chain knee extensions for a long time. I've listened to a lot of her work and read a lot of her work. Eric Mira as well from the US. They're just really sensible clinicians who, when you listen to them talk and the work they've done, it really sort of dispels a myth about open chain exercises. Like one of the simplest things I learned from Eric, for example, is that when that graft gets placed in, even in the first 2 to 4 weeks, it's going to be the strongest that ligament. It's effectively hard tendon at that point before it starts necrosing and dying and going through the ligamentization process. So for those first 3 or 4 weeks, that's going to be the strongest and the most stable and the most solid that ACL is going to be for the arguably next 12 months. So why do we worry about it so much? It's only, like in that kind of 8, 6, 12 week window where things just get a little bit weakened off inside the knee. But even still, the loads that person is lifting, if we're keeping the weight relatively light relative to the person's body weight, but also too light in terms of repetition range, we're not going to do any damage or stretching to the ACL graft, even in that kind of window there, if we go through full range. And Lynn Snyder-Mackler sort of backed that up with her work as well. But I think the argument definitely came back from some pieces of research in the 90s that did show there was some translations, differences between closed chain exercise and open chain exercises. It was a lot of experimental stuff, and it was done in a population, and now forgive me if I'm wrong here, I'll have to double check, but from Lynn's recallers, the translation was actually done on a group of ACL deficient knees as well. So they already had laxity there, and then we put an open chain exercise into it, and it kind of shifted the tibia more, which added more laxity arguably to it. So some of that early research unfortunately stuck and held on. And then we had some other trials sort of show strain values that were large with open chain exercise versus closed chain, but it never really answered the question about stretching the graft and all that kind of stuff. So eventually we got to a point where there was a couple of trials done. There was one trial done in 2013 that introduced open chain exercises from week 4 to week 12 in a reduced range of movement between 45 and 90 degrees. And they had a group of early participants and late participants. So late participants were starting from week 12 onwards through full range. And then we had the early participants that were 45 and 90 from weeks 4 to week 12. Effectively, there was no differences in graft laxity between those two groups. Once again, at that stage, we weren't seeing the full range of movement, but we're growing confident in actually open chain exercising patients, even though we're still reducing some movement. Now, that's led the guidelines that have come out. So there's been 3 or 4 guidelines published in the last 4 years that have said open chain exercises are safe. There's still question marks remain about, do we go full range from day one, and how much load do we apply? Or do we still just be a bit cautious and introduce them from week 4 to week 12 in 45 to 90 degree angles? So it's less of a question now about, are they safe? The question is yes, but it's more about what range of movement do we work with? What loading do we work with? And that's where a recent trial, like literally 2023, a French researching group headlined by Florelli was the leading author. They did open chain exercises starting from week 4, 0 to 90 degrees. And they did it 3 times a week, 8 sets of 8. So lots of volume. And then they did a 6-month follow-up, and they had no differences between groups between the laxity seen at that 6-month follow-up. So in the most recent publication, there's no differences in graft laxity, even when we start going 0 to 90 degrees with our open chain exercises starting from week 4. So it's a bit of a dog's breakfast at the moment. And there's no true clarity, because we've got some guidelines saying we should still be a bit cautious and go 45 to 90 from week 4 to week 12. And then we've got some publications saying, look, it's safe to go 0 to 90. We probably haven't reached consensus yet. So based on what there is available, I kind of structure my open chain in a couple of ways. So I'll go 0 to 90 from day one. If they can sit on the edge of the bed comfortably, and the minute they can do that, where they can sit on the edge of the bed at 90 degrees and hang there, and if they can extend their knee up to 0 against gravity, then we're doing that. That there is very safe. There's like 3% strain on the graft tissue, which is going to be less than a body weight squat. And if we're comfortable squatting and putting 10 kilos on someone's back, 20 kilos on someone's back, yet this is less strain than sitting on the edge of the bed, is less strain than putting weight on someone's shoulders, and that's 4% strain, then we've got our priorities wrong. Also, walking and that mid-stance strain values on the graft is going to be, once again, 2 to 3 times that of someone sitting on the edge of the bed and kicking their leg up against gravity. Even if you have 5 kilos of load, that strain value goes only up to 4% as well. So it's a very minimal shift. So I think if we're comfortable dishing out leg presses, squats, and closed chain exercises, yet we're a bit cautious and careful of and being fearful of open chain exercises, even with a 5 kilogram load, then we're probably worrying about the wrong things. But definitely I sort of hold people at about 5 kilos of load, maximum 0 to 90. Lynn Snyder Mackler may sort of shake her head and say I'm being too soft there, but she's definitely got a more experience under her belt when it comes to the loading. But what makes me sleep well at night is I'll do open chain exercise 0 to 90, about 5 kilos max with most people until week 12. Just making the patellofemoral joint stay really comfortable and happy, and we'll just do that. I will add more load between 45 and 90, so I'll restrict the ranges from about week 4, and I'll start saying, let's add 5 kilos, 10 kilos, 20 kilos, whatever the person can do. and we'll do, say, 3 lots of 15, kind of reps in a 45 to 90 degree range with some load. And then from week 12, we're going for it. We're opening up and we're gradually adding load over time. And, knee extensions after 12 weeks look really no different to someone. You'd grab a healthy population person from the street and say, let's make your knees stronger. Let's get you open chaining really sensibly. Meanwhile, we've got all the closed chain work integrated as well.
Yeah, great stuff. One of the quotes I remember listening to from Lynn Snyder-Mackler on a podcast was that open chain knee exercises are not only safe, but they're essential in that there's some unique properties to them that gets the quadriceps firing much better than closed chain exercises. But you're giving some great guidelines there as to how to fit them in, and like many things in ACL, there's still a lot of unknown there, and we need to get a little bit better with being a little bit more systematic as to how we use them. So just moving on, still on the early stage stuff, sorry. Can you tell us a little bit about blood flow restriction and your electrical stim, your Compex, and those types of things? Are you using those much in your clinical practice, and how do you sort of see those fitting in for ACL rehabilitation?
Yeah. To be honest, I don't use either very much at all. I've been reading a little bit more. Obviously, both have been, both eStim and BFR definitely getting some. I mean, you talked to, once again, Lynn Snyder-Mackler's, the godmother of this. She did some electrical stim work, neuromuscular electrical stim work back in the 90s, and she's been a advocate for that for years and a proponent of it for years and years, and it's only just started to regather some popularity again. But it's been recommended in ACL guidelines for quite some time now, to really get on top of that muscle inhibition that's very evident after ACL injury and ACL reconstruction. I find, I guess the barrier for me to bring it in, and this won't be the same for everyone's clinical environment, it's just that if we're going to do eStim, my patient isn't going to go home that afternoon with a Compex, or they generally don't have a Compex at home. So I will ask them, do they have a unit at home? Yeah, because to get the most out of it, we need to be doing it 5 times, 7 times a week, or even sometimes twice a day. So if you've got 45 minutes with a patient and they don't have a unit to go home with, I think philosophically, I want to give them some tools that they can reproduce 2 to 3 times a day over and over and over again, rather than sort of spend 20 minutes that I'm only going to use once a week. So for that one reason, I don't do it, because I go away and say, all right, how am I going to get this person recruiting their quads better at home? So I'll use cryotherapy. Cryotherapy is my big thing. I'll say, ice the crap out of your knee around the clock for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Really get on top of that pain relief so you can recruit your quads better. With better quads recruitment, we're shifting, we're pumping, we're getting the muscle excited, we're helping to reduce swelling, we're helping you improve your function, we're helping improve knee extension, we're helping you all benefit your knee in many different ways. So I just sort of look at what's my biggest bang for buck thing here, and that same breath, it's the same reason why I don't use much BFR. Unless this patient can come in twice a week, 6 weeks in a row. Once again, I don't want them to go home and use BFR unsupervised, especially in that first 1 month when the blood clotting and post-op complications are a high risk, and I don't want them to do that unsupervised. But I will do it if they're really struggling with patellofemoral joint pain, and that's really my main indicator here. Is if they got PFJ pain, they're struggling, and we can't recruit their quads no matter what we're trying. We'll use BFR in the clinic, and we'll go through a block of training where I will get them to come in twice a week for a month or so, and we'll get on top of it. But outside of that, I kind of really reserve my use of both of those things really judiciously, and I very rarely use it.
Okay, nice one.
Not to say that I'm right either. There's probably a lot of people would argue against me, and that's fair too, because the evidence is there for that to be used. But I think in my clinical situation at the moment, where most patients are coming in once a week,
could be done more regular.
It's just hard to justify sort of giving them all that information. If they can't go away themselves and reproduce what's most important to them at the moment. And yeah, that's kind of where I sit at the moment.
Yep. Okay, good one. So if we just move on, I know we're running a bit short of time, but if we move on from a kind of early stage to mid stage, once the knee's calm, you've got range of motion back, but you've still got big strength deficits, say 12 weeks plus. One of the changes that we've been making in our clinics with the rehab is to do more heavier weights, and there is research to show that people doing heavy weights, say with a few sets of 5, with maybe they could do 8 if they had to, but they're quite heavy weights, rather than see 3 sets of 12 where maybe they could do 20. And yeah, so really just loading up the knee a lot more than we probably have in the past. And how are you sort of prescribing exercises to that phase, and how are you feeling, like particularly for patients who maybe aren't familiar with resistance training? I know it's a little bit of a hard sell to do so low reps when they're just familiar with 10 and 12, and it's obviously a bit more scary and intimidating to push such heavy loads in a knee that they're still sort of learning to trust again. How are you sort of managing that?
Yeah, it is. It's an important time frame too, like that, like you said, that 3-month mark through to 6 months where running's kind of in the mix, jumping's in the mix. They've got return to sport goals, penciled in for about the 9-month, 12-month mark. So we need to make a shift, and we need to wash away strength issues, power issues, and the only way forward for these patients is as you said, like to lift heavier, so the muscle strength and the power in the limb can deal with those forces when they hop, when they jump, when they land, when they change direction. There's no way getting around it. So it is a bit of a hard sell for people who are unfamiliar to the gym. I think how I kind of soften that for people who've never squatted before, never deadlifted before, who are just really sort of, their form may not be great. There's so much value in just the good old fashioned knee extension, hamstring curl, and leg press. Like you sit and push. Yes, it's not very exciting, and a lot of people would argue it's not functional. But if these people want to have function, they've got to build a strength base there. That's what makes them functional. Is you can't be functional when you've got a 30% strength difference between limbs, and you're clearly compensating one side over the other. You can't function your way out of that. You can't functionally train your way out of that stuff. So just to actually go in and do some isolated work in a really safe, controlled manner can be a really simple strategy where, you really challenge them. I do find, though, we might need to make a very careful steps, though, to go from where the first 3 months, where it's probably a bit light and easy, where they're probably sitting somewhere between 3 sets of 15 rep range, roundabout. They're punching out 3 sets of 15s per exercise for a good chunk of time there. To go from 15s down to sets of 5s within a month can sometimes be a big bridge to cross. So I'll definitely just, once again, bite-sized chunks. Every 3 to 4 weeks, I'll say, all right, we're going to get used to this load. Twice a week, 3 times a week, we're going to go to the gym. We're going to lift. We're going to basically do 3 sets of 12 now, or 4 sets of 12 now, rather than 15. So we're going to lift a little bit heavier, but you're still going to be able to force out the reps and do that. 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, all right, we're going to take you down to 10s. All right, and we're going to just go down that little bit more. And 3 or 4 weeks later, we're going down a little bit more. So little stepwise, I think that's probably the strategy that I take, especially for those that are unfamiliar with the gym. Even those that are familiar with the gym, the 15s down to 5s, once again, can just get a bit tricky. You just got to be careful with how the knee reacts. If it gets swollen and sore, we just need to make some running adjustments. But absolutely, there needs to be a shift. So you'd want to be hopefully hanging around about the 6-month mark, 7-month post-op mark, and they hopefully are sort of punching out, 4 sets of 6, 5 sets of 6, or 5 sets of 5s, or 4 sets of 4s, whatever your poison is. They should be there round about that figure, around about the 6 or 7-month post-op mark. So their limb can be much more tolerant to the hopping, landing, jumping stuff, and then eventually training the sport.
Terrific.
I know you've got to head off, but just one last thing. Wanted to touch a little bit on non-surgical ACL. It's obviously a very hot topic at the moment. Can you tell us about how the rehab differs, plus or minus the cross-bracing protocol or any other bracing protocol? There's a few out there. And is the Melbourne ACL Rehabilitation Guide still relevant for people who are choosing a non-surgical pathway, is sort of replacing the post-op with post-injury markers, or is there a non-surgical Melbourne guide on the way? Or
it's a great question, because arguably no, the rehab is no different. Cross-bracing protocol definitely differs. The range of movement restriction. I think you had Steph Bilbay on the podcast a few weeks ago. Hopefully she dived into it a bit. But the cross-bracing protocol, effectively makes the patient non-weight bearing for the first 6 weeks, and first 4 weeks you're in 90 degrees, and then you gradually increase your range of movement and your weight bearing status until week 10, and then you're fully weight bearing up until week 12 outside of a brace. So because of that big restriction to encourage some healing, the rehab protocol absolutely differs. And they've got their own protocol that we should be adhering to and abiding by. Those that are trying to just rehabilitate without the cross-bracing protocol, and to see if their knee can cope without ACL, or even see if they can be a lucky healer, because the lucky healers exist out there that spontaneously heal without any formal bracing protocol. That these people just need time. And if we can buy 3 months of their life and try and get them to rehabilitate, and if they want to roll the dice and not brace their knee, we'll know by about 3 months post-op, clinically how the knee's feeling. And if they want to go spend the money on another MRI and see has it been successful, that's an option for them. But when you've got the non-bracing, non-operative patient going through rehab, it really doesn't differ at all compared to an ACL reconstruction. And Melbourne ACL Rehab Guide, once again, just adjusts accordingly. So as you said, instead of being post-surgical, you're post-injury. So, and in fact, what ends up happening, because you haven't had that second insult to the knee, which is surgery, their progressions through rehab are actually a little bit quicker, because their knee joint only had one abusive load, which is the injury. You don't have that second trauma to the knee, which really rattles up the knee, makes their muscles shut down, and that swelling and pain kick in. So you'll actually find a lot of these people actually progress through rehab a little bit quicker and progress through the guide a little bit quicker too. So that's a big positive. The only thing I would say differs a little bit is that if we do want to see if this person can be a lucky healer, and there's no shred of evidence to say what I do here is right, but I will restrict their range of movement on a knee extension, because I do know if that ACL is recovering and is spontaneously healing, I know if I'm going to take him out to full chain, full range, open chain knee extensions, and we've got those high strain values at 0 and 30 degrees, I just feel, once again, philosophically, I just wonder, am I disrupting that healing process if I get them to go full range there and place a strain on the recovering ACL? If that is happening, I just do wonder about that. So I do protect their range until week 12. So I'll go 90 to 45, just biologically and clinically reasoning my way. And then from week 12 onwards, we'll fully open them up. So that's probably where it differs a little bit. But other than that, it's largely the same.
Yeah, I guess hopefully the next stage, we're speaking with Tom Cross, he's hoping to publish his paper on the ACL tear type classifications, so we'll get a better understanding of what ACL injuries are likely to heal and which ones are unlikely to heal, and that'll give us a bit of a better guide as to how we manage those patients. But at the moment, there's very few radiologists or doctors or healthcare professionals at all who can read the MRIs with the same level of skill as Tom Cross and the guys involved in that study. So I hope definitely Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Mick. It's been terrific, and I'm sure people involved in rehabbing ACLs as people who have sustained an ACL injury is what we sort of set up this podcast for, to help people through their ACL rehabilitation journey, from decision making through to early decision making to return to sport. We'll find this invaluable as well, and I've certainly got a few clinical gems out of it myself as well.
That's awesome. Oh, thanks, Bevan. Thanks for the opportunity to talk shop, mate. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
The Knee Gurus, brought to you by Asia Physio, providing world-class physiotherapy care across Asia. Visit our clinics in Tokyo, Singapore, Niseko, Hakuba, Nozawa and Myokokogen.